Hey guys, Justin Atkins here, 2017 Forest Wood Cup champion. As many of you know, I live right here on Pickwick Lake on the Tennessee River. One of my favorite things to do is get out here in the summer, throw a Berkley Dredger out deep on these ledges. I'm gonna give you a few tips and tricks on how I like to do things, and maybe we can get you dialed in. One thing I want to speak about before we get too deep is my setup. I'm gonna probably talk a little bit about each thing as we go, but as a whole, this is a 7-foot 10-inch Abu Garcia Ike Delay Series. You want the Delay Series. It's a glass composite rod. It's gonna give you a good load up. It's a Gen 4 Revo winch, 5:4 gear ratio, 12-pound test, Berkley 100% fluorocarbon, and I'm throwing a Berkley Dredger 25.5. One thing about deep cranking is color selection. Everybody has their favorites. A lot of times I feel like a crankbait that runs straight is a little more key, but in early April when the fish are first starting to get out, I like to go with a chartreuse blue back or something that's like a chartreuse with a purple back, a bright crankbait, something those fish can really see. That water that time of year when you get that current or just that time of year in general, we get a lot of rain, it's got a little color to it, and I think a bright crankbait's really key. And then today, as you can see, it's a little later in the summer. The water's really clear. I like to go with more of a shad pattern. This black spatterback does a really good job of imitating shad, barfish, whatever it may be. And that's what I like to go with a little bit later in the year. So just keep it simple. Throw you a bright colored crankbait when you get a little bit of color in the water. When the water clears up a little bit later in the summer, go with more of a shad pattern. You know, right now, this school of bass looks like it's sitting in about 21 and a half feet of water. The bait I've chosen to throw out there is a new Berkley Dredger 25.5. You know, the reason I picked this bait is you want your crankbait to be digging on the bottom. Bass are not going to eat it when it's just coming, you know, going through the water column up above them. That's not what creates that reaction strike. You want that bait digging in the bottom, and I'm always going to pick a bait that's going to run about 5 foot deeper than the depth that I'm throwing it in. And this 25 just is perfect for it. I like to throw it on 12-pound test, and the reason for that is you may lose 6 inches, 8 inches of depth dive versus 10-pound test, but once you've thrown a crankbait a ton of casts throughout the day, you start to shock your line, and so you start to feel it feels almost a little bit brittle. And by the end of the day, you'll rear back to cast that bait, and you'll break it off, and it'll land right over here, and you have to tie it back on, and 20 casts later, it breaks off again. And that just comes from a lot of shock from really rearing back and whooping this crankbait out there, because 10's just not made to take that. But 12 takes it a ton better, so I'll give up just a little bit of depth to be able to throw my plug all day and not have to worry about slinging it off. One thing that a lot of people don't think about when they're throwing a big plug is boat position. So after a lot of research, you know, the guys at Berkley threw every kind of plug in the world into a tank to determine how quick it reaches its maximum depth. And this Berkley Dredger, it takes 31 feet to reach its maximum depth of 25 feet on, say, a 40-yard cast. So once you've thrown it out there 40 yards, or a normal person's probably going to throw it about 30. So we'll say you've thrown it 90 feet. It's going to take 30 feet coming to you to get to that 25 foot. So you want to keep the boat in position to where you're close enough to the fish that the bait's hitting the bottom on the other side of them. So a lot of people don't think about that. That's one thing that's really key to throwing a crankbait. And another thing that I feel like is really key is your retrieve. Sometimes I'll incorporate like a stop and go, but no matter if I'm stopping and going or not, while I'm reeling it hard. You don't want you can't take this bait away from these fish when they're ready to bite it. So the least amount of time you give them to look at it, the more it just causes them to react to it. They don't get time to think about it. That bait's digging and jumping around all over the bottom and coming to them, and they either got to move or eat it. And a lot of times they eat it, and that's what causes that good bite, is to crank that bait really hard. I throw mine on a Revo winch. It's a 5:4 gear ratio. That keeps me from getting wore out when I'm really working that plug hard. It's got the big handle on it, allows you to pull that bait through, because even any kind of plug is going to have a good bit of resistance. So it allows you to pull that bait without wearing yourself out. If you go to like a 6.4 or a 7:1, a lot of times they have smaller handles. You could do some adjustments by putting a bigger handle on your reel. That would make that a little bit easier, but I like to just throw the 5:4 That allows me to work that bait at all kind of different speeds. If for some reason I feel like I need to slow down, if I'm cranking it shallower, a lot of rock, something I need to slow it down, keep from getting hung up, I still got that option. Or if I want to turn the speed up on them, I can wind this plug really hard. Fusion 19s will get your fingers. One thing that's real important when you're cranking on the Tennessee River is when you catch one is get your bait back out there real quick when you get that school fired up. Got to keep a good set of Berkley pliers in the boat when you're cranking, so you can get these Fusion 19s out of them, get them back in the water. So one thing that I've kind of kept to myself that I've noticed really helps, when you got that school found, you know right where they're at, and you get that plug cranked down there to them, you feel it start to hit the bottom, about like it is right there, and they've quit biting it on just a straight retrieve. I like to throw 12-pound tests because I will give that plug a rip, almost like it's a spoon. And sometimes that'll cause those fish to react to it. You can never get too creative with putting action into your plug. I mean, these fish see it all the time, you know, just burning by them, burning by them. And when they're fresh out deep, you know, it's not hard to catch them. They bite it really good, but as the summer goes on, you go get days without current, things like that. You may have to go to a Berkley power worm or something like that, but a lot of times I find that giving it an extra action, really winding hard stop, really winding hard stop, or maybe giving it a longer pause and just pulling it with your rod tip and then going back. Giving it some kind of different action, something they don't see all the time, will help a lot in getting bites on a big crankbait. One last technique I want to talk about when it comes to deep cranking, whether it be on the Tennessee River or a deep reservoir, whichever it may be. When you have schools of bass and they are getting close to that maximum depth of your plug, say they're in that 22, 23, 24 foot range, maybe even out to 30 or 35, and you just can't get your plug down there like you like on a cast, or that school's really stretched out, it's big, it's 150 feet long, and you can't hardly make a cast and cover the whole thing. What I like to do is a little technique called long lining. So what you're gonna do with that, is you're gonna toss your bait out behind the boat, you know, straight behind where you feel like your boat's gonna be traveling, so you can make a straight track over the top of the bass and bring your plug straight through them. So now I'm gonna watch my down scan and my map and get me a track back through the bass, keeping an eye on my line to make sure it's keeping a good line up right behind the boat. The reason bass bite a crankbait is because that bill's deflecting off the bottom, and that causes it to be real erratic, really jump around, stirring that bottom up. They feel like it's a crayfish or whatever it may be that's just running across the bottom, cause them to react to it. By long lining this bait, you're taking your pull point and extending it way out. On a normal cast, your bait only comes so far before you start trying to pull it up. But when you stretch your line out real far, it doesn't have that pull point. So this 25-foot diving plug will get down to 40, 45 foot deep really easy and really quickly. And so once you've run all that line off and you're only trying to get it to 25 versus 45, that bait's gonna dig really hard in the bottom. It's gonna make it be extra erratic, and it just drives those fish nuts. It makes them react to it a lot better. And I've seen a lot of days where when you long line your bait, it gets you more bites than just on a normal cast. The one problem with long lining is you will get hung up really easy. If there's a stump or something, your bait's digging so hard in the bottom, you tend to catch that from time to time. So be sure to bring plenty of extra plugs or a plug knocker if you're gonna be long lining. So now that I've run off, you know, probably half my spool, this Revo winch holds a ton of Berkley 100% fluorocarbon 12-pound test. I'm just gonna engage the reel and start winding this plug, and just trying to kind of feel it out. I can feel now it's coming up that break out there in 30, coming up to 25, and now it feels like it's kind of flattening off and just coming straight down the flat where the bass should be. I'm gonna keep the same retrieve that I would on a normal cast. Found me a stump down there, but it came over it. I'm gonna keep the same retrieve. I'm gonna wind that plug pretty hard. You definitely want it stirring up the bottom. And the other thing that I would suggest, you can do it either way. Found that stump. I would suggest doing it this way just because the bass set up correctly. But I would always start up current and run my line off and bring your bait with the current. It takes a lot of time, so most of the time when I'm going to set back up, I will run it out and bring it the wrong direction. You'll catch a few like that, but a lot of times the bass are going to be sitting to where they're looking up current, and you want to bring that bait right to them where they have no choice but just to react to it and eat it. Not every time, but a lot of times you can just troll, get back on the other side of your bait, get your pull point kind of down, that way you pull it back out the way it went in. This is another reason I like to throw 12. You get 10 hung up, it seems to break a lot easier. I'm not gonna say I get them back every time. We may or may not get this one back, but at least 60, 70% of the time I can get my crankbait back once I've gotten it hung like this. There it is. You always want to be sure you have your button clicked. You don't ever want to be on the trolling motor while your reel's engaged. That then becomes trolling, and that is frowned upon a lot. So no trolling during tournaments, only long lining, which is reel engaged. Throw them off the spool, just kind of feather it a little bit so your reel doesn't blow up and run your line off. Spool's getting low. I'm gonna take my foot off the trolling motor. I've got the boat still kind of just momentum going straight. That'll help me get the plug started, and then just start winding. And just keep an eye, because it's gonna take you, a couple minutes to get this cast in. And so you don't want your boat to drift too far left or right and get your pull point off. And so you just kind of want to keep an eye on it. And I wouldn't suggest like just trolling forward, but maybe just a little left or right to keep your bait coming just like you want it. And bring that plug back through. I'll tell you something else while I'm thinking about it that does make a point, is getting your reels full. A lot of people don't see that, but when you're throwing a gear ratio reel, such as a 5-4 to 1, if your spool's only half 4, you're losing half of your pull power. So keeping that reel completely full is gonna be a really big deal on getting the most out of your cast and being able to reel that fish reel that plug really hard. Let's see what we got here. Come up and jump. It's the best part about long lining. Ah! You get to fight them for a long time when you get one on. Little brown one. Nice of you join us, man. I mean, you see, when you start getting them hooked with 2 hooks every single time, that's when you know they're eating that bait really good. And this Berkley crankbait comes factory with Berkley Fusion 19s, which is the treble hook that I throw on every bait that I use now. It's got treble hooks. They're unbelievably sharp. One thing that I really like about them is they're pretty rigid and stiff. And so what that causes is a light wire treble hook, and they're not thick wire by any means. They're not like a 2X or just a 1X, but they're really rigid. And so when you get a fish on a long cast with a slightly limber rod, this hook doesn't flex out. So a lot of times what you have happen is you get a bass down to about the barb and that hook starts to flex, so you lose your penetration. Every single time these hooks do not flex, and so when I get them in, they're all the way down here in the bend, because that hook just keeps digging the more pressure I put on them. And I hardly ever lose bass. I've grown to love these Fusion 19s. They're awesome hooks. I suggest everybody check them out, whether you're throwing the Dredger crankbait or not. You need to be putting Fusion 19s on your plug. And as much as I've touched on throwing 12-pound tests and throwing 12-pound tests, 12-pound test is still not flipping line. You're not flipping into bushes with 12-pound test. If you are, you're breaking a lot of fish off. And so when you're deep cranking on the Tennessee River and all these other places, you got zebra mussels, stumps, rocks, whatever else you may encounter, you need to retie often. I probably sit down every 20 or 30, 40 casts, check my line. If I feel a little bit of abrasion, I'm gonna cut it off, start all over with a good fresh knot. That way you just got a peace of mind. You don't have to worry about slinging your plug off or getting the 5-pounder on and him breaking you. A lot of times in the moment, I'm really known for getting big ones up and just swinging them over the side, and that's because I don't have to worry about my line breaking. Using 100% fluorocarbon and keeping a fresh knot, I just never break them off, and that's not ever a concern of mine. And show you a knot that I tie. It's just a Berkley tri-lane knot. It's on the back of the package. It shows you how to do it. I've tied it since I was just a little kid. You run your line through your loop twice. That'll give you a loop here. I hold it between my fingers, and you create a second loop by twisting your line about 6 times around itself with your tag in. And then you're going to pass through both those loops, and it creates one right here on the side. This one right here on the side is really is the most important one, because it keeps you from having any pinch points anywhere. So go through double lines, and then this one on the side, and that'll keep that knot from pinching itself anywhere in one spot, which is really bad for fluorocarbon. You don't want any hard bends in your knots or things like that when you have fluorocarbon, because it'll pinch itself and break. Moisten your line really good and just kind of ease it down and help it out. I always take my I always take my 2 fingers and kind of pull that knot to help it slide down. You don't want to just force it and pull it down, because then it's still going to burn itself. Just help it get down there close, then give it a good tug, and you're ready to go. And please don't cut your tag end off too short. Everybody wants to get down here and microscopically cut this tag end off. If they didn't see that part, they're not going to see that part. So whether you're tournament fishing or just want to take the kids out for an afternoon of fun catching these guys, I hope you can take these tips about deep cranking, whether it be on the Tennessee River or your local home lake, and get dialed in.